Awesome. Okay. Let me just share my screen. All right. I think we have everybody. We're probably still going to be getting others piling in here over the next few minutes, and that's quite all right, but we will jump into our overview. So the general structure of the call is we're going to start by doing a quick review of the basic reference information on what you need to do as dev devs to be getting ready for Chang. And then we're going to go through a structured Q&A sort of on each major topic, just to really give everybody a chance, topic by topic, to make sure that you have your questions answered. And finally, there'll be some open time if anybody wants to go into greater depth that we have touched on. So yeah, we really want to take this call and this time to make sure that basically any open questions that people have can be addressed. And as I mentioned earlier, the call is being recorded. So if there's anything that you don't get a chance to ask or think of later, you can go back and check the recording. I want to encourage everybody to be thinking actively of your questions as we go along. Every once in a while, I'll stop and say, any questions? So at those times, you can even think about putting your questions in the chat. That can be a helpful way to make sure that they're there and that we are aware of them. It can also be helpful to preface your question by question so that we can see them in the chat. So yeah, think of them as you go along, throw them in the chat, and yeah, we'll dive into it. So we're going to start out with a quick review of things that we've covered a couple of times now. I do just want to also point people, I will pin this message in the chat so that you can see it, new people who are coming in. We have the agenda in there, and that agenda has links to several useful guides and documentation that are relevant to the things that we're covering here. So please do jump in there and make sure that you have it. Also, obviously, the public agenda is located in the announcements, so you can come back to this if you need to. All right, we're going to start with cost model gotchas. And in our earlier meeting, Ziyang started with this. We also have Alexi here. So I don't know how you guys would like to split that one up. Either of you can feel free to jump in first.
Cost model, I think it will be good for Ziyang to start. I can say how it can be updated in Conway era, but with respect to the content of cost model, that's definitely Ziyang's territory.
Okay, let's go to Ziyang. But actually, first, I just thought it may be useful just to sort of reset the room, so to speak, and say where we are. Obviously, we just had the recent announcement that the target date is August 27th, and we have a go, no-go for that on Friday. Leonard, would you like to sort of tell us where we are?
Yeah, sure thing. So we know from a code perspective, we're all good for 9.10. So thank you. Everybody else has been already upgrading. Test complete, release package, preview has been forked to 9.10. Thank you, Sam. And at the moment, the proposal for pre-prod is indeed on the 24 to 00 UTC. So we're pretty good on the readiness on that one. I think at the moment it's all that's in the pipeline, correct, Sam?
Yep. So that's already submitted. It takes effect on the 24th.
Cool. Target date at the moment is 27th. I guess the current key measures, we are driven by the measures. SPOs are at 82% at the minute in terms of by stake readiness. Exchanges are 40%, 28% in progress, and we're making good momentum. And thanks everybody, all the dApps folks who have reached out to over the last 3 days over Discord. We now have all of our top by TVL 50% ready, 27% in progress. 23% are not started, but some are actually waiting for pre-prod to perform their testing. So we're well underway, and I really appreciate all the folks who from all the various decentralized apps who have been helping give me a correct picture over the last couple of days. So that's really helping us to create that momentum towards Chang. So that's all we have to say at the moment. We're tracking green for 27th, and we don't have any key risk I want to raise. So thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Leonard. All right, then we'll jump into the first there, point A under 1. And Xiang, can you
So
take
I
us
think
into the...
if this is supposed to be a similar agenda to last week's meeting, then I think number 1 is about reference script fees, right? And I think that's what the gotcha is about. There's not any gotcha in the Plutus cost model. So why don't we talk about reference script fees? Alexi, do you want to speak to it, or I can, or if not, I can speak to it if you prefer.
I'll be happy to speak about reference script, but I would like to mention something about cost model that is that has changed in Conway, which is very different from previous eras, in a sense that in Conway era we will be able to update cost model parameters in a way that we can add new primitives and we can remove new primitives. Previously, the number of cost model parameters was fixed in era, so you can't change that. Where in Conway, we can, if a proposal is submitted with less than known primitives, then whatever the tail of the primitives are, they will be set to max bound. This is effectively disabling them. And if you submit more, that will be also accepted fine. If Plutus doesn't know those primitives yet, then that'll be fine as well. And then at an intra or hard fork, we can go ahead and start using them. If those primitives are at that point known by Plutus. But that is it's just a nice feature that we really wanted for a long time. It gives us more flexibility. With respect to reference scripts, everyone heard I'm pretty sure everyone has heard already that there was an attack, and the fee changes that we have with respect to reference scripts, they were planned for a long time. We were aware that there could be a problem there since quite a while, but we didn't know how to fix it until without a hard fork. Right. So we introduced this protocol parameter ref scripts per byte. This essentially very similar. The idea initially was it would be very similar to how min fee A works. So we take a size of a transaction, we multiply it by min fee A, and that gives us the fee for the transaction. So this is a similar approach we initially took for the reference scripts. We calculate all of the reference scripts, the transaction references, be it in the regular inputs or reference inputs, and we multiply it by the min ref script per byte. When the attack happened, we realized that it would not be a sufficient deterrent for the attack because in order for it to be a sufficient deterrent, that the parameter would have to be set as high as min fee A potentially, maybe slightly lower, but it would be so high that dev developers would be pretty upset about, right? Because that removes a lot of usability of reference scripts because previously they were free. Now they not only people have to pay for them, but they would be also very expensive. So we right on the spot we had to come up with something different. And we came up with an exponential model for the reference script fees, where the most common case we we looked at all of the reference scripts that have been used on chain so far, and 99.9 percentile of all of our reference scripts are under 25 kilobytes. So we decided we're gonna keep the linear model in chunks. And up to 25 kilobytes, this is essentially a linear model where the min fee ref script per byte is set to 15 Lovelace, right? Which makes sure that the most common case is fairly inexpensive and keeps the reference scripts usable. But the more reference scripts that are being used in the transaction, the more expensive they become. And with a total of 200 kilobytes limit per transaction, which would, if you ever use this much of reference scripts in a transaction, you will pay approximately 6 ADA for that transaction just for the reference scripts. So that would be fairly expensive, especially comparing to them being free previously. But this limit and the price model prevents people submitting transactions with 3 megabytes of reference scripts like it was used in an attack, and does deterring these attacks clearly. Now, this is the introduction of this model, right? In the next era, some of those parameters that are hard-coded right now will become actual protocol parameters, so they can be tunable. And if for some mysterious reason, the community does not really like this, so they can propose a change to this parameter to be 0, and that effectively disables the reference scripts fees, which would be really bad. But that's up to the community now. And if exponential model is also not something that people will like, in the next era, it would be possible to set the parameter, the multiplier from exponential to 1, and that essentially makes it linear. So there is a document that I wrote up on in a Ledger repository. I'll send a link to it here.
Yeah, it's linked in the, that's great. Thanks, Lexi. And it's linked also in the agenda. So
Cool.
yeah, you have that.
So you can read it up. If you have questions, please reach out to me. Don't hesitate. And if you have any questions, go ahead. Oh, Zin, go ahead.
Yeah, just a quick comment. So this fee basically pays for the deserialization of the script in the reference inputs, right? So we are not charging that right now in the Babbage era, even though we obviously do charge for script execution, but we cannot cover the cost of script deserialization using the fees for script execution, because it's possible to write scripts that are very large, very expensive to deserialize, but very cheap to execute, which is basically the mechanism behind that DDoS attack.
Yep.
And then the good news is that even though the script deserialization fee will go up in the Conway era, the script execution fee will go down, because we're lowering the CPU cost model parameters of Plutus by somewhere between 10% and 20%. And that will be good news for everyone, because the script execution costs will go down, and that will be especially good news for scripts that are that use the BLS built-ins, because those built-ins are CPU intensive. So not only the cost will go down for those scripts, but it will also allow more BLS operations to be done in a single script. For most other scripts, what they can do in a single script is more limited by memory limit. So lowering the CPU parameters won't let them necessarily do more things in a single script. But then the other piece of good news is that the memory limit is also going up in a meaningful way, which will indeed allow most scripts to do more things in a single script. So my understanding is that, correct me if I'm wrong, my understanding is that these parameter changes, both CPU and memory, will likely come after the hard fork and after being approved by the parameter committee. So yeah, that's it.
Yeah, maybe could Sam, maybe you could speak to that question about the parameter committee there from Sam?
Yeah, what was the question again?
About well, Zhang, you can say.
So the question is, when exactly will the parameters and the memory limit be updated? Is it shortly after the hard fork, or at the time of the hard fork?
So Plutus V1, V2 cost model is getting submitted at the same time as the protocol version bump. So the new cost model will take effect for all 3 cost models basically at the time of the hard fork. And then there's an additional change to the cost model to add the additional parameters that are necessary for the next hard fork that will be introduced before the next hard fork. So we need to update the cost model sometime in the next 3 months before we execute the final hard fork. That answer the question?
Yeah.
Yeah. What about the change to the memory limit per transaction per block? Is that going to be at the time of the hard fork or after?
Memory limit per block. You're talking about the execution units in the parameters?
Yeah. Yes.
I'm not familiar of changing that right now. That's currently not in the plan to change.
Okay.
And would need to go through the parameter committee to basically get that approved.
Okay.
But we're not doing that as part of the hard fork.
Okay, so to summarize, basically everybody is going to get lower CPU cost model parameters at the time of the hard fork. The memory limit will, I think Kevin confirmed that it will go up based on the benchmarking results, but it will be off sometime after the hard fork, after being approved by the parameter committee.
Yep.
Yeah, sounds right. All right, so it sounds like
So
we're
the
getting a little bit
ICC
into-
basically will be the ones that will be signing that off.
Yeah.
So the parameter committee will make a suggestion, it will get published on chain, and then the ICC will vote on it, and they'll be able to unilaterally vote on parameter changes prior to the next hard fork. However, there are some guardrails in the Constitution itself that talk about how long something has to be looked at before it gets proposed on chain. So, I mean, that might be a while.
Yeah. So great. It looks like we have a question from Phil, and I just want to, before we go to Phil, everybody else, if you have any questions on anything that was just said, any sort of open loops in your mind, please write those down, put them in the chat, and we'll get to them in a moment. Yeah, and raise your hand when you're ready to speak as well. And Phil.
Yeah, just for clarification for those watching and the recording, you mentioned that the ICC would be responsible for putting into action that parameter change. From what I've understood, and from the general community, there's some confusion around whether the ICC has power unilaterally to make these changes, and for what duration they have this power.
3 months.
Yeah, so it's a feature of
So basically,
the interim period.
it
right?
moves. It moves from the 3 central entities to the ICC for the length of the bootstrap, and then after the bootstrap, the DREPs come online, and they can't do it unilaterally. They're still required to assent to them, saying they're constitutional. But basically, the DREPs will then be required to vote on changes.
Perfect, great. So for clarification, it's just that the ICC, the purpose of it is to determine whether governance actions follow the Constitution. But for this
Exactly.
3-month period, they, as an interim committee, they have unilateral control to make these changes.
Right, because we don't have any way to get the community sentiment on whether something should be enacted. So it's really much more about protecting the chain for these 3 months and keeping the chain running.
All right, sounds good. So thanks, by the way, Phil, for clarifying that. I think it is really useful for the record. Yeah, okay. Let's go to Surab. You have a question?
Right, thank you. And my question is related to this protocol parameters update. So, I mean, if I'm not mistaken, both Blockfrost and Maestro do not give the Convoy-related protocol parameters as of now for the preview network. And so we have to like hard code the Convoy-related parameters in our transaction building tool. So I'm just a bit worried here, like suppose the hard fork happens on mainnet, and then suddenly the protocol parameters are changed against what is mentioned in the Convoy Genesis file. So is there like some thought?
What do you mean they don't? What do you mean they don't give the parameters?
Right. I mean, so for Blockfrost, like if you make a query to the protocol parameters endpoint, you get the parameters, but you don't get like Plutus V3 parameters or this reference script cost per byte parameter. I mean, all those which were introduced in the Convoy era.
Ah, okay. So the Blockfrost API hasn't reflected it yet. I see what you're saying.
I suppose. I mean, I'm sure for Maestro, I'm not sure for Blockfrost. So as of now, like we have hard-coded these parameters based on the Convoy Genesis file, and I suppose that it will be true for like quite a number of epochs after the hard fork. And if the parameters like change suddenly, like you mentioned also about the cost models update, so I mean that could create issue.
They can't.
Yeah,
they
in
can't change.
general, anytime you hard code something that's a really bad thing to do, I understand that basically some tools haven't updated to basically show the new functionality maybe, but it's very important that those tools update rather than hard coding parameters, because yes, things can change. As I don't anticipate any major changes between now and Chang +1, but it is possible things can change. And yeah, you should absolutely be focusing on the actual parameters when you make your transaction and not a hard-coded set from a snapshot.
But they can't change suddenly. Right, there's
Yeah.
a process of people need to vote and first propose, then vote, then enact, and there is a certain period of time the committee ICC has to look at the parameter change before they actually vote it in. So there is time to react if all of a sudden we need to make a change, but that's not expected.
All right, thanks. We'll move to Phil real fast for a final comment here, and then we're going to move on to the next section. We've already touched a little bit on it, it sounds like, but in just comparing generally POTUS V1, V2, and V3, what people need to be aware of about the similarities and differences coming with Chang that they need to be aware of for upgrading their dApps. So Phil, would you?
Yeah, just from a developer perspective, it helps to have duration on the length ahead of time that we have to react to these changes. So previously, right, parameter changes, the length that you would have to react is roughly 30 days, because yeah, that was the time it would take to enact the fork. Is that the same?
The time to react is 30 days from a change.
Right, yes. So say there's a proposed parameter change that is accepted. How much time do developers have to react?
I want to say it was 3 months in the interim constitution.
Yeah, if ICC votes and everybody votes in, then you have 1 epoch to react. But even
Yeah.
but if for the ICC
Are you asking the social or the technical?
The technical, yeah. So from the
1 epoch.
second the developers know that, yeah, for the second it's confirmed to go into the network, then developers will have 1 epoch to make those changes to.
Yep.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah, but there might, of course, be social processes that people agree to put in place as well. So I'd keep that in mind too. If there's something that is very important for dApp devs about how those processes work, then it would be good to make the ICC aware of that so that they can work on their social processes as well. Yeah. Okay. So let's move to section B here. Comparisons between POTUS V1, V2, and V3. Prior to this, we had Sandip from dQuadrant going over this and also migrating on the just overview of how to migrate a dApp from V2 to V3. There was going to be a representative from dQuadrant here because he wasn't able to attend. We just found out yesterday. So I just want to see if we have that person, if you can raise your hand. Otherwise, we have a few people here who can muddle through on your behalf.
So going back to the previous one, param 04 from the interim constitution, at least 3 months should normally pass between the publication of an off-chain proposal change for a critical parameter update and the submission of the corresponding on-chain governance action. The guardrail may be relaxed in the event of severity 1 or severity 2 network issues following careful technical discussions and evaluation.
Right. Sam, is that from the Constitution?
That's from the interim constitution. Yes.
Great. Yeah. So just for people's awareness there. Yeah. Okay. So Rishav, are you Sandip's delegate from dQuadrant?
Yes, I am.
Amazing.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay.
And feel free, by the way, if you have a screen share you want to use, feel free to do that, but you don't have to.
Yes, sure. I'll be sharing my screen.
Great.
For this, I think Matthew don't share.
Can you see it?
We can.
Okay. So I'll be talking about migrating the dApp from Plutus v2 to Plutus v3. And for the example, we have taken a NFT marketplace. So the overview is that it is an NFT marketplace, which is titled the Cardano Marketplace. It is open source. You may look at it. And it has a functionality to mint your tokens, place it on sale in the marketplace, buy and withdraw, and also use reference scripts to buy and withdraw. So the effects of Chang hard fork. So the first is the effect of CRP69, which is in Plutus v3. So validators now only take a single argument, which is built-in data, which will be parsed to a script context. So this basically is done to simplify the validation process. And the next one from CRP69 is optional datum requirement. So UTXOs in smart contract addresses will no longer mandate the presence of some datum to be redeemed. And basically, the datum is optional now. And this change enables more efficient donations and contributions to DAOs. So the next one is validator change in Plutus v3. So the 3-parameter validator that we are familiar with, which takes datum, redeemer, and the context, is now a 1-parameter validator, which only takes the script context. So this is basically to streamline the validation process, and we'll be comparing v2 and v3 validators after the Chang hard fork. So for v2 validators, it still takes 3 parameters, datum, redeemer, and context. And the check function, which is widely used, which used to return a void, now returns a built-in unit type. But keep in mind that the return type of v2 validators can be anything, and it will work as long as there are no size limitations or X unit limitations. And for v3 validators, it takes a built-in data, which is parsed to script context, and decoding of the datum redeemer will happen here using the new functions introduced in Plutus v3. And one important thing to note is that return type of v3 validators must be built-in unit. And this is the mostly overlooked one, adding the OptionsGXC pragma. So for Plutus v2 scripts, if you want to run it in new dependencies, you will need to add the target version of OptionsGXC pragma and set it to 100. And if you're using Plutus v3, this is done by default, but if you still want to add it, then you may set it to 110. And the next one is handling parameterized scripts in v2. So this one is also overlooked sometimes. You must specify the PLC version to be 100, because the default one, which is used by this function liftcode_def, is 110, which is catered towards v3. So if you have a parameterized validator, you need to lift it by specifying this version if you're using Plutus Ledger API v3. I mean v2. Okay, so for v3, you will need to use PLC version 110. However, you can also use liftcode_def since the default one is 110. And decoding datum and redeemer in v3. So datum will be obtained from script info field in script context if the purpose of the script is spending, and redeemer will be directly decoded from the script context itself. So this is an example. So if you have a script context, you can use this function introduced in Plutus v3, script context script info, and you'll get the script info type. And you can basically pattern match it to see what the purpose of the script is. So if it is a spending script, you can use the getDatum function and then parse it to your required datum. And in case of the redeemer, you can directly get it from the context by using this function, script context redeemer. And you can use the getRedeemer function and parse it to the type of the redeemer you want. So there are some efficiency improvements with a type of evaluation called, which we labeled as lazy evaluation. So the script context size is basically larger in Plutus v3 due to the introduction of governance actions. And to mitigate this, lazy evaluation techniques, which decodes only necessary fields, and it will reduce the script size. So basically, if you just want the script info, you can turn the built-in data into a list of built-in data and pattern match it to get the script info. And the script context of the form of built-in data, which will be turned into built-in list, and you can extract the necessary information without needing to decode the entire script context, and it will reduce the script size. So in the document, in the agenda, which is linked there, we have a link to a full report, but this is basically the overview of the report. And we have also tried a super lazy evaluation, which further decodes the script info to get like the transaction components like inputs, outputs, signature, the mint information, etc. And this will also reduce the script size. So in conclusion, if you want to migrate your dApps, be aware of the cost model changes and the changes from CIP 69, that is the one parameter validator and optional requirement for datum. And also you may consider using lazy evaluation to reduce the script size. This is about it.
Great. All right. Well, we have some initial questions from and/or comments from Alexei and Xiang. First of all, I just want to mention to everybody again, if you have questions for Rishav, please put them in the chat, and then we'll get to those in a moment here. So I can't remember which hand I saw first, but Xiang is above Alexei on my list here, so I'm going to go with Xiang first. Xiang, you're on mute if you're speaking.
Okay, so just want to point out that these some of these points are mostly relevant to Plutus TX because it's I mean, especially the one with the performance, the lazy versus super lazy versus strict, because Plutus TX, I mean, the default way of writing Plutus TX is such that it will strictly decode the script context, and so because Plutus V3 has a larger script context, that will make the script more expensive, even if you don't use any new features in the Plutus V3 script context. And of course, there are ways to write it in a lazy manner, such that it doesn't strictly decode it. If you're using some other languages like Aiken, then that should be less of a problem. I think Aiken does not, by default, strictly decode script context, so the performance should be similar to the super lazy variant, which means upgrading from V2 to V3 should not increase your cost or size if you don't use any new features in V3.
Great. Alexei?
And I'm not sure what it is attributed to, but I noticed when I was writing some test Plutus scripts, is when you use from built-in data, you'll end up with a much bigger script than if you use unsafe from built data, which is something you want to use anyways, because if it doesn't decode it, you want to fail the script anyways. So this is just a point. I'm not sure what it is attributed to.
Yeah. Phil?
Yeah, I just want to briefly mention one of the largest reasons why Aiken performs so well is it works with everything in data encoding all the time. And one of the biggest improvements in the new Plutus versions, I think, is the ability to define types as data. And then when you work with them, it'll keep them in the data encoding. And you'll be able to access fields that way. So yeah, it's a little template Haskell that you can add to your types to manipulate them as data. And it has a really large impact on script size. Also, in general, there have been a lot of improvements to the efficiency of Plutus. From JED, we've noticed like about a 30% reduction in EX units in the newer versions. So if people haven't tried out Plutus in a while, because in the early stages they struggled with DApp efficiency, now is a good time to revisit it.
Yeah, so Phil is absolutely right. So there is a way to define data types in Plutus TX with data encoding. The thing is, we don't yet have a script context API that is encoded in built-in data, and we're working on that. It's coming soon. So right now, if you want to lazily decode script context in a lazy way, you have to write it in a sort of lower level way. Like you have to use the built-in functions on data directly to operate on it. But yeah, we will have we will have an alternative script context API that's backed by data in the coming weeks.
Nice. Thanks, Yang. Okay, so if you have another question about what Rishav just went over about the migration, please do ask that now. And I'm just going to return, since we had another question addressing the relationship between Plutus V1, V2, and V3 from Surab, and I'm not sure this got answered before. It may have, but is the cost model update to reduce CPU cost for V3? Is it for V3 or V1, V2 model are also getting updated?
V1, V2 are also getting updated.
All right, so there's your answer, Surab.
So the same built-in functions will have the same cost model parameters across V1, V2, and V3.
Great, thanks, Dan. Yeah, Phil.
Does Plutus V3 currently support sum of product?
Yes,
case.
Plutus V3 is the only Plutus version that supports sums of products. Although in the future, probably Chunk plus 1 or Chunk plus 2, we're going to add sums of products to V1 and V2. The reason we couldn't add it before is that doing so will require adding new parameters to Plutus V1, V2. And as Alexei just explained, we couldn't do that before, but we will be able to do that in the future.
And does the Plutus TX compiler currently take advantage of that?
Yeah, so that's something that in the so Plutus V1, V2, you have to compile it with the target version of 1.0.0, which is something that Rishabh just explained in his slides, because Plutus V1, V2 only supports Scott encoding, so that's why you have to do the target version 1.0.0 flag. But for V3, you can use the 1.1.0 flag, which will compile to Samsung products.
Great. Yeah, I just want to illustrate that for the community because this is another unique efficiency advantage that the new Plutus TX version has.
Great. Thanks, Phil. All right, so now we'll move on to the structured Q&A section. This, it may be that there aren't very many questions and we just zip through this in 2 to 3 minutes, or some people may have more significant things that they want to work through. So this section really is less about sort of putting out information to you and more about if you have any sticky issues or if there are open questions, taking some time to work through those. The first one maybe could use a brief explanation though. So I've seen a couple of questions, around on Twitter and places about testing on pre-prod and the timeline for the pre-prod fork. So Sam, could you give us some insight into how people should be thinking about using pre-prod for testing?
Yeah, so let's first start with the definition between preview and pre-prod. Preview is intended for early testing of hard forks, and pre-prod is intended to match mainnet as closely as possible. So if someone wants to test an update to something on mainnet, they can test it on pre-prod first. So by design, we try to limit the time between pre-prod and mainnet hard fork to a couple of days. So once we hit the 24th, basically, that gives you just 3 days, basically, for testing on pre-prod. But really, if you want to know if your stuff is going to work with the hard fork, you really should start as soon as preview forks. You shouldn't be waiting on pre-prod.
Great. And so as far as preview, is preview already forked, or is that?
Yeah, preview forked about a month ago.
Yeah, okay. Got it. So any questions about preview and pre-prod and just testing in general before landing on mainnet? Any questions at all? Adrian.
Does anyone have a private testnet that's easy to set up? Repository for it, maybe?
I mean, there's the SanchoNet demo repository that I have. It requires Nix and requires a little bit of pre-setup because it drops you into Babbage and you actually have to execute the fork, but it's fairly simple to do. I could help you with that if you need any help with that.
Do you have a link for me?
Yeah, I can drop it.
Thank you.
Nice.
This is the one I've been using since last summer in Edinburgh when we started doing the demonstrations for the SIP 1694 stuff.
Right. Related to the Adrian's question, I just wanted to mention that in the Cardano node repository, there is the Cardano testnet, which you can spawn in the Conveyor. So this is what we are using inside our transaction building tool, namely Atlas, to run the private testnet against.
Yeah, that's a really good one too.
Could you
If you
drop
don't
the
need
link
to
to that?
test going through all the hard forks, it's just Cardano node repo.
Oh, okay, Cardano. Cool.
Yeah, if you don't need to test the hard forks, then that's a perfect solution to do.
All right. Any other questions on this about testing preview, pre-prod, or private testnets? All right, then we'll turn to cost model. And obviously we just got some info on that from Xiang and Lexi, but any open questions that people have about the cost model, things that, yeah, just any open loops for you that can be closed, since we have the subject matter experts on that here. No? Alexi, yes, further comments.
The only comment I have is if you ever use a cost model for anything, just try to treat it as a list of integers rather than a map in a JSON from keys to values, because that has been a confusing matter. Lotus historically has renamed those, and we had to deal with it in some hacky ways. So I know it could be inconvenient if you try to deal with JSON format of a cost model, but the most reliable one is to use a list of integers. Just I wanted to throw it out there.
Thanks, Alexi. Yeah, so I don't know how much overlap there is between this, between script support and cost model support here, but I was given these as separate points. So any further questions about scripts, things that can be clarified? No?
There is one small issue that I could potentially mention that has changed, which was brought up yesterday by Pi, was if you don't use any scripts and you supply the spending datums in a transaction, then the hash integrity check, the data has changed slightly, right? And that affects the hash integrity check. So it's only this use case when you don't use any script, if you don't use any, if you don't supply any redeemers, then that has changed in Conway. And if you have questions about it, I have I'll drop a small PR in a message here in a moment that describes it.
Thanks, Alexi. Yeah. Okay. So then, any questions? Maybe we'll do these separately. But any questions about Plutus v3 in general? Anything that can be clarified for you guys? All right. So CIP 69. So I don't know if we've touched on this at all yet so far. Obviously, this was something that got added in for this hard fork. What was it, like a month or two ago? So any questions about CIP 69 and its implementation? Gotcha.
Yeah, that was covered already.
All right. Well, then it sounds like we've covered all of our major topics here. So I just want to give a chance then for, first of all, any final comments from any of the panelists, things that people should be aware of, anything that we've missed?
There is something that hasn't been mentioned, which is fairly useful, I think, is Plutus v1 scripts can now be used as reference script.
All right.
Conway era.
heard it here. Great. All right. So we have maybe one or two questions from the chat. May have been touched on already, but I just want to surface them again so that we don't leave anybody hanging. And while I'm touching on those, if anybody else has questions based on what's been discussed here so far, please do put them in the chat now. So a comment from Andrew. I'm not sure, is Andrew still on the call? You can throw your hand up if you are, Andrew. You mentioned it toward the beginning of the call. We're not. Hey, there's Andrew. Well, maybe Andrew, if you'd like to just make the comment that you put in the chat earlier. I don't know if it's something that you wanted to raise verbally, but now's the chance if you do.
Yeah, it's not a big deal. Just people were saying that, you know, acting like there was no protection for this attack in Babbage that happened with the reference scripts being free, but we did actually put some protection in place in front of the mempool. So the mempool is already acting like, you know, once there's so many scripts, it starts requiring that they pay a lot more to even get into the mempool. So even though it's not actively enforced on chain yet, some of these things were pulled forward in front of the hard fork just to protect the network.
Yeah, absolutely. So that was a lot of that stuff was already written up by Alexi and was ready to go into Conway. We did make some changes to how it was calculated with a consultation with Pi and Philip DeSaro and a few others, because it was going to cost out a number of different dApps from the way we were originally calculating it. But yeah, when we had this attack happen, we basically pushed out a release that released some of these Conway features early in the mempool rather than enforcing it at the ledger. And then once we get into Conway, it will be back to only being enforced by the ledger rather than at the mempool. Alexi, you have anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, so this approach actually sort of works as a sanitizer rather than a prevention. So if there is a version of pool that stake pool that is not running this version, right? So it still allows bad transactions to go on chain and propagate, but as long as a lot of people upgrade, then it works as a very, very good deterrent in Babbage.
Yeah,
and enough people had already upgraded, so this is no longer a problem in Babbage right now.
But a good note for the history at least. So thanks,
Yeah.
Andrew, for thanks for it's always good to hear your voice. Leonard.
Yeah, so 2 days ago we set up a couple of Discord groups to gauge the sentiment in terms of readiness for Chang. If anybody has not been reached out to, would you provide your Discord handle and we can set up another group? We've like 9 or 10 each these groups, so they're fairly split up. And we just want to make sure we A, assist you guys, and B, know where you are in the actual readiness process. So if we're recording it, we can put those handles. If you just put them in the chat, that'd be cool. And we can add you to that group. If we haven't found you already in the list of people we've reached out to, it would be great if we can just get that sentiment that you're ready. And it helps us to, capture that kind of social momentum we need to have a high level of confidence heading to the hard fork. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that note, Leonard. So you can drop those in the chat now. And if you don't have it on hand for whatever reason, I'm thinking you can probably send that to the email that we have here in the public agenda. Let me know if I have that wrong, Leonard, if that's not the right place to send those. Okay, so we had one other question here, which I wanted to touch on from Ken Eric. Quick question regarding readiness. Does anybody know how Fireblocks are progressing? They are key infrastructure for many moving parts in the Cardano ecosystem. I think we had an answer to that in the chat, but I just wanted to make sure we have it verbally for the recording as well.
Did we have that again with blocks?
Okay, so does anybody know how Fireblocks are progressing? They are a key infrastructure for many moving parts in the Cardano ecosystem. And let's see, I think...
Can they speak and explain what they're trying to say?
Sure, yeah. Let's see, Ken Eric, are you able to unmute and comment here? I thought I saw a comment later on. Oh, from Leonard. Oh, Blockfrost are aligned on the date for Chang of the 27th of August, but maybe that wasn't a response
Oh,
to
how
that.
fire blocks are progressing.
Yeah.
Leonard, do you have any
So it came up in
contact with
conversation the
Fireblocks?
other day. I think we do. I did have a side conversation about this, but good point. Top priority for me to find out. So thank you for reaching out on that one.
Okay, great. Yeah, so we'll obviously the readiness page is a good place to watch for any overt updates, but it sounds like we'll also be giving some dedicated attention to that. Andrew, do you want to comment on that?
As far as
or-
I know, in talking with Fireblocks, I don't believe they use any smart contracts. So hopefully their infrastructure doesn't need an upgrade, but I would still talk to them just to make sure. I mean, they don't need an upgrade beyond upgrading the node versions.
Yeah, sounds good. All right, thanks, Andrew. We had a question here from Phil. Developers likely won't want to update their tooling for a proposal unless they have high certainty that the proposal will indeed make it into the network. Is there a date earlier than an epoch where they will have some social assurance that the proposal will likely be passed? So this is kind of a process question about governance proposals. Maybe a little bit wider than the scope of the call, but if there's an answer on it, it might be useful. Do we know anything about that? If not, we can just move on.
We'll take it away and come back.
Yeah, sounds good. Okay, so I don't think we have any other questions in the chat. So this is everybody's last chance if you have a question to raise your hand. And otherwise, we will close up for the day. All right, looks like that's confidence. So if you, and we don't have any, oh, did I just see a hand?
One question I would have is if anyone wants to raise their hand, if they have any concerns with the current timeline that we've proposed for the hard fork that are on this call, now would be a good time for you to raise your hand and basically vocalize your concerns.
Take again 10 seconds. Let people.
Harry raised his hand.
Oh, we have Harry. If you'd like to unmute and jump in, I think that was before Sam. Sam asked for people, so don't feel free to jump in and talk about something else. But also, if anybody else would like to raise concerns about the timeline, please feel free. Okay, it was a mistake on Harry's part. Thanks, Harry, for letting us know. Okay. I think Ken Eric put in a comment, but I think it's just a clarifying comment about the previous conversation, so we probably don't need to address that as a question. All right, looks like we don't have any hands for raising concerns about the timeline, so that's great. Any other questions? Final call? All right, well, so please do send in your readiness to set us to the hard fork at intersectmbo.org email address. And again, also you can send your Discord handle there too to get in a Discord group with Hard Fork Working Group and just help you on any issues and make sure things are all aligned and running along on time. Also, please do feel free to tweet at Intersect as well. It's great to let the wider community know that people are progressing too. We're just about to close up, but I saw a hand from James. I don't know if that was a misclick. James, anything to say?
I pressed the wrong button. I wanted to join in the clapping. Sorry.
Okay, awesome. That's a clap. All right, great. Thanks, guys. We'll close
Thanks,
it up.
all.
Then. Looking forward to the hard fork.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Cheers. Bye.